Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're going to just be doing a simple wall practice in a very supported legs up the wall, feet on the wall position. So for this practice, I would highly recommend that you find yourself a bit of wall or a door and hard floor if possible. On that hard floor, you're going to want a blanket that's folded up a little bit for some cushion, but also the ability to slide. And that will make more sense later. But if that's not possible and you have to be on carpet, that's fine. You're just going to have to wiggle your bum away from the wall at some point later on in the practice. But once you're set up and ready to go, we can get started. All right, so first we're going to get ourselves into a legs up the wall position. So to do that, you're going to sit near the base of your blanket. You're going to sit pretty close to the wall. You don't have to be touching the wall, pretty close to the wall. And as you start to lean back, you're going to swing your legs up and lay down, okay? Now, we don't need, like I said, the bum to actually be touching the wall, but you want to be close enough that your legs are fairly straight up and down, all right? So let's just take a moment to enjoy this position. This is a pretty restorative position because you're fully supported by the floor and the wall. And just take a moment to check in with parts of your body that are making contact with the floor, parts of your body that are not making contact with the floor, noticing what kind of sensations are arising in your low back, your hips, your upper back, your knees, and just deciding if you need a little more cushioning underneath you, or maybe you do need to be a little further from the wall so that your hips aren't quite so bent with such a straight leg. Do whatever you need to do to find comfort in this position. Now we're going to let go of all muscular effort, which in your body might mean that your legs stay exactly as is. It might mean that your legs flop out a little bit with a slight bend in the knee. And for some people, it even means that their legs just fall right down the wall, coming into kind of a butterfly position. And if that's the case, that's totally fine. We're just going to bring our attention to our breath. Nice, slow, easy breaths, whatever feels natural. All right. Wherever your legs landed when you let go of muscular effort, we're just going to bring our legs back up the wall so that knees are kind of pointing straight overhead behind us. And we're just going to start off playing with a little bit of hip flexion. So you can leave your foot in contact with the wall, and we're just going to slide that heel down the wall a little bit, bringing a little bit of hip flexion into the picture. The knee also happens to bend, but we're focusing on a movement at the hip. We can slide that foot back up, slide that heel down, and just notice if any sensations or shifting or maneuvering happen through the pelvis, the other leg, your low back, as you move this foot up and down. And if there is extra stuff happening, can you make that movement just a little smaller where it's truly just this leg that is moving and everything else is just nice and quiet, okay? Now we're going to straighten that knee, heel still supported by the wall, and we're now going to do rotation at the hip joint here. Just a few little rotations. So if you're looking at your feet, your foot's going to be turning out and back in. But the movement's not coming from the ankle. The movement is coming from way down here by the floor. That thigh bone rotating in the hip socket. Now, if we add a little bit of hip and knee bend, lift that foot away from the wall, rotate that thigh like we were just a moment ago, and then rest that back of the heel on the front of the right shin. Now we can start to do the itchy shin as we move into a figure 4-like or ankle to knee-like position. You might not actually have your foot cross the knee joint. We're just going to move up and down that shin bone. And we're just moving this hip joint in some flexion, some rotation, all at the same time. Okay, we can unhook that ankle, let that heel come back to the wall, and try the other side. So we're going to start with our little heel slides for some hip flexion, paying attention to the pelvis, the low back, the other leg, your jaw. Nice and slow. Matching it to your breath even is an option. All right, we can straighten that knee, heels against the wall. We can play with rotation in this hip. So once again, that foot's gonna look like it's turning out, but it's actually the thigh bone rotating way down here by the floor in the hip joint. And again, just paying attention to, is there any funky shifting that's happening between your pelvis and the ground or your low back and the ground to make the foot turn out even further? Or can you find a range where you're literally just moving this leg bone, this whole lower limb, and you're not having sensations or crankiness wake up and start or simply get worse, okay? All right, so let's bring a little bit of a bend in that hip and knee to lower the heel down the wall a tiny bit. We're gonna lift that foot away from the wall. We're gonna introduce rotation again with the foot kind of free floating in the air. And we're gonna bring it over and we're going to rest it on the front of that other shin. And then we can start our itchy knee on this side. So just again, really nice slow movement. All the while, we've added complication here in that we're not just moving in one way. We're flexing while the hips rotated at the same time. So we're still paying attention to any bonus movements, any helping hands from other parts of our body, any sensations or symptoms kind of waking up and saying hello. If anything extra is happening, just keep the movement a lot shallower. So maybe your itchy shin is just way up here by the ankle, or you can come back to the wall and just do just the rotations or just the heel slides for flexion. All right, but what we're gonna do now is we're gonna unhook that ankle, bring that leg back to the wall, and we're just gonna take a moment to rest. Feel those thigh bones becoming heavy, like they're sinking into heavy, thick mud into the ground as that top of the thigh bone, the femur, settles back into the back of the hip socket. All right, so now is where we are going to bend both of our knees. We're going to have the feet against the wall, and don't push off too hard or too fast. We're just going to start to push ourselves away. And we're aiming to wind up in a 90 degrees at the hip, 90 degrees at the knees position. So this is still fairly restorative because your feet are still in contact with the wall. So your legs are fairly supported here. Your back is still supported by the floor. So you can kind of just hang out here, all right? But what we're gonna start to play with is sending the thighs side to side, with the feet staying in contact with the wall. So you might notice a little bit of lifting under the feet, just at the edges, but for the most part, we want the soles of the feet to stay in contact with the wall, and the legs moving side to side is dependent on how much movement is actually available in your hips. Okay, and now for a comparison, let's get real swishy with it. We're gonna let those feet tip off the wall. Notice how much more movement you can get. Notice how much freer it feels. You can start to let the opposite hip, the opposite bum cheek lift off the floor. Just get a lot more yummy rotation happening through those hip joints. Little bit of spinal twist happening if you want to take it that far. And then let's peel it back again for a second. Let's bring those soles of the feet to the wall again. Now that you've experienced that bigger, freer movement, let's come back to just the hip joints. So the soles of the feet stay in contact with the floor a bit more. You might notice that your legs move to one side a little bit easier without the feet wanting to come away than they do to the other side. For me, it's a little harder to the right than to the left. Okay, and let's just get nice and loose with it again. We're gonna let those feet rotate on the wall there. Knees can move a little further over to the side. Pelvis starts to move and shift and lift. Spine starts to twist a little bit. And just notice how that's landing in your body. All right. We are going to take our left feet away from the wall. We are going to push with the right foot that's still in contact with the wall off and over, so that if we had headlights on the front of our pelvis, they're starting to point a little bit up towards the ceiling and off to the side. This knee is going to collapse in a little bit, but that foot is staying fully sole contact to the wall. And then we're going to come back. And this leg's just off the wall. It's bent. It's just kind of going along for the ride. As you push away, knee kind of rotates inward, pelvis shoots off to the side a little bit, and come back. One more time. Let's go. Tipping over to the left, we're pushing off with the right foot. Right thigh is kind of falling inward. Right butt cheek's off the ground. Pelvis is pointing off to the side a little bit. Not right to the side of the wall, but, you know, up and over. And now we're going to let that left foot come back to the wall. We're going to lift the right foot away, and it's just going to kind of hang out. We're going to push off with that left foot. Left bum cheeks leaving the wall, left thigh is kind of collapsing inward, pelvis is now pointing off in this direction. We're going to bring everything back. Right foot still kind of floating, but it's more in line with your body again. Push off with that left sole of the foot, letting everything come over to the right hand side. Left thigh collapses inward, left hip leaves the floor, pelvis points off to the right. And come back. And one more time, or push off with that left sole of the foot. Everything kind of tips over to the right a little bit. And we're going to come back. All right. Let's just take a moment here to settle after doing that. And then just for fun, we're going to do something super simple. We're just going to lift a foot away from the wall, bringing the knee towards the chest. You're not grabbing the leg and bringing it as far as possible. You're not pushing off with the foot that's still on the wall. You're just bringing it in for a nice, easy amount of flexion where you haven't started doing anything funky yet to bring it as close as possible. That left foot can go back to the wall. We're going to lift the right away, bringing the knee towards in the direction of the chest. Again, nice, comfortable, easy movement of flexion through the hip joints. Nothing else needs to be getting involved just yet. Bring that foot back to the wall. Flexion in the left hip, knee moves in direction of the chest. When you've gone where you can go, try throwing in some rotation, right? Rotate in, rotate out. You can drop that ankle to just below the knee joint there. We're kind of back in a figure 4-like position. We can lift that foot by just straightening the knee ever so slightly. We can unrotate. We can bring that foot back to the wall. Let's try the other leg. So we can do whatever amount of flexion you have that is comfortable and not forced. And then we can play with rotation of the hip joint. And notice how as I rotate my hip this way, which is called external rotation, my foot kind of lines up over the shin of the leg that's still supported by the wall. We can bend the knee more to let that ankle lower to the front of the shin, just below the knee joint. Once again, we're in a figure 4-like position. And then we can straighten that knee ever so slightly to lift the right foot. We're going to unrotate and we're going to bring that foot back to the wall. Okay, now our last thing today that we're going to do is we're going to push away from the wall a little bit more, just enough that your feet can come to the floor, okay? And you get to decide how wide you want your feet to be. So walk them out a little bit and then let your knees collapse in towards one another. Now we're just going to hang out here. And essentially your hips are in internal rotation. If it's feeling pinchy or uncomfortable, you can try bringing your feet just a little closer together. That's going to mean your legs don't have to fall inward quite as far to rest upon each other. But if you're finding that that's pretty easy, you can bring your feet even wider. You can let your knees fall even more inward before they meet. And we're just going to hang out here. Coming back to your breath. Checking back in with the different points of your body that you sort of took stock of earlier, the parts contacting the floor, the parts not contacting the floor. Paying attention to how your hips feel in this position, if that starts to change the longer you're here. If it does, you're welcome to adjust and change how far apart your feet are at any point. But we're just giving our hips an opportunity to rest in internal rotation, because so much of what we do in yoga has us doing hip openers. Hip external rotation. But hip internal rotation is just as important, but it's often neglected. So this is just a really chill way that you can hang out lying in your bed, lying on the couch, lying on the floor, while you read a book, while you watch a movie, while you listen to music, whatever, where you can easily give your hips the opportunity to rest in internal rotation. Now, so long as you're comfortable, you can stay here for a little while longer. But I'm going to wrap things up here. So when you are ready to come out of this, all you need to do is bring your knees up a little bit, walk your feet in towards each other. Maybe you want to do a couple simple windshield wipers just to switch things up and get some movement back into your hip joints. And then you can roll onto your side. You can bring yourself back up to sitting. So hopefully that was a comfortable, fairly easy little hip movement thing for you to try. I hope that it helps loosen things up and gets you moving your hips in all the ways that maybe you don't move them super often. But I will leave you at that, and I will see you next week.